She had no idea that the janitor in her building possessed information that could either destroy or save the biggest deal of her life. The 42nd floor of the Ashworth Industries Tower hummed with the quiet intensity of ambition at 11:30 p.m. Victoria Ashworth stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, Manhattan's glittering skyline stretching endlessly before her like a constellation of possibilities. At 32, she commanded one of the most powerful family dynasties in corporate America. Yet tonight, she felt the weight of 3 generations pressing down on her shoulders like lead. The merger documents spread across her mahogany desk represented more than just a $10 billion acquisition of Meridian Corporation. This was her moment, the deal that would finally prove she was worthy of the Ashworth name, that she could step out from the towering shadows of her grandfather Harrison and her father Charles. Both legendary titans who had built this empire from nothing. Victoria's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked every inch the CEO, tailored Armani suit in midnight blue, auburn hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, green eyes that could freeze a boardroom or inspire loyalty. But beneath that polished exterior, doubt gnawed at her like acid. "Victoria!" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "I'm heading home now. Don't stay too much longer. You have the board meeting at 7 a.m. "Thanks, Jennifer. I'll just finish reviewing these projections." The building fell into its after-hours rhythm. Only security guards and cleaning crew remained, invisible ghosts who maintained the Temple of Commerce while the warriors of capitalism slept. Victoria had always found these late nights oddly comforting. No distractions, no politics, just her and the numbers that would determine whether Ashworth Industries soared to new heights or crashed under the weight of her inexperience. She was deep in financial models when the elevator chimed softly in the hallway, probably building maintenance. She'd barely registered the sound when voices drifted past her door, hushed, but carrying the unmistakable cadence of a man speaking to a child. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more inspiring tales about love conquering all odds, please hit that like button, subscribe for more heartwarming content, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your support helps me continue bringing these powerful stories to life and reaching people who need to hear them most. Thank you for being here. Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? Daddy has to work tonight, but Mrs. Rodriguez will pick you up from school tomorrow, okay? "I know, Daddy, but why can't you pick me up? All the other daddies come to school sometimes." Victoria's pen stopped moving. Something in the man's voice, patient, infinitely gentle, but tinged with exhaustion, made her look up from her documents. "I wish I could, Emma. You know Daddy wishes that more than anything. But this job lets me be home with you during the day, remember? We make our pancakes, we do your puzzles, we read stories, the princess ones, especially the princess ones." Victoria found herself smiling despite her fatigue. She'd never heard that kind of tenderness in a man's voice. Her father had loved her, certainly, but Charles Ashworth's affection came wrapped in expectations and delivered through achievements. She couldn't remember him ever speaking to her with such uncomplicated devotion. 20 minutes later, curiosity finally won over concentration. Victoria stepped into the hallway, ostensibly to stretch her legs, and nearly collided with a maintenance cart. The man pushing it was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that could use a trim and brown eyes that held depths she hadn't expected to find in a janitor. He wore the standard Navy uniform of the building's cleaning crew, but something about his posture, the way he carried himself, suggested this wasn't where life had originally planned to place him. "Oh, excuse me," Victoria said, startled by both the near collision and her own reaction to him. "No problem at all." His voice was cultured, educated. Definitely not what she'd expected. I'm sorry if we disturbed you earlier. My daughter and I were just— Your daughter comes to work with you? He shifted slightly, and she caught a flash of what looked like embarrassment. Sometimes, when the babysitter can't make it. Emma's 6, and she's better company than most adults. Victoria found herself smiling again. I'm sure she is. I'm Victoria, by the way. She extended her hand, then realized how ridiculous it must seem. A CEO in a $1,000 suit formally introducing herself to the night janitor. But he took her hand without hesitation. Daniel Carter. And I know who you are, Ms. Ashworth. I've seen your picture in Fortune magazine. His handshake was firm, confident. The calluses spoke of hard work, but there was something else, a fineness to his fingers that suggested they'd once held more than cleaning supplies. Fortune, huh? I hope they used the good photo. Daniel's smile transformed his entire face. The one where you're standing in front of the Singapore office opening. Yeah, that was a good one. Victoria blinked. Most people who read Fortune couldn't remember specific articles 5 minutes after closing the magazine. You remember that? I remember a lot of things, especially when they relate to impressive business strategy. He paused, seeming to catch himself. I mean, from what little I understand about these things. But something in his eyes suggested he understood quite a lot about these things. Well, Victoria said, reluctant to end the conversation, I should let you get back to work. And I should let you get back to saving the corporate world. She was halfway back to her office when his words stopped her cold. How did you know I was working on something important? Daniel's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that might have been calculation. Lucky guess. Who else works this late except someone trying to change the world? It was a perfectly reasonable answer, so why did it feel like he was hiding something? The next evening, Victoria found herself working late again. Definitely not because she hoped to run into Daniel Carter. She was reviewing due diligence reports when she heard the elevator again, followed by that same gentle conversation between father and daughter. Daddy, can I draw you a picture while you work? Of course, baby girl. But you have to promise to stay where I can see you, okay? I promise. Can I draw the pretty lady from last night? Victoria's pen stopped moving. What pretty lady? The one with the sad eyes. She was nice, but she looked lonely. Like the princess in the tower who needs a friend. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sad eyes? Lonely? Is that really how she appeared to a 6-year-old? 20 minutes later, she manufactured another reason to leave her office. This time, she found Daniel methodically cleaning the conference room windows, while a small girl with dark curls identical to his sat at the massive table. A box of crayons spread before her, like treasure. Emma Carter was beautiful in the way only children can be, completely unconscious of her own charm. She wore a purple dress that had seen better days, and light-up sneakers that blinked with each movement. When she looked up and saw Victoria, her face lit up with the kind of unguarded joy that adults spend fortunes trying to recapture. You're the princess from yesterday, Victoria laughed, genuinely delighted. Princess? I think you might have me confused with someone much more glamorous. Nope. Emma shook her head decisively. Daddy says princesses aren't just the ones in castles. They're the ones who are brave and smart and help people. You help people with your work, right? Victoria glanced at Daniel, who had stopped cleaning and was watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, but also something that looked almost like fear? I try to, Victoria told Emma. What are you drawing? Emma held up a paper covered in bold strokes of purple and gold. It's you! See? You're in your tower, but you're not trapped. You're the one who makes decisions that help everyone. Victoria stared at the drawing. It was remarkably sophisticated for a 6-year-old, Not the stick figures she'd expected, but actual proportional figures with genuine artistic flair. "Emma, this is beautiful. You're very talented. Daddy says I see things differently than other people. He says that makes me special." "Your daddy is absolutely right." Daniel cleared his throat. "Emma, sweetheart, Ms. Ashworth probably needs to get back to her important work." But Victoria surprised herself by saying, "Actually, I could use a break. Emma, would you like to see my office? I have a telescope that shows all of Manhattan." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Daddy, can I?" Daniel hesitated, and in that hesitation, Victoria caught another flicker of something. Not just parental protectiveness, but genuine anxiety. As if he was afraid of what might happen if his daughter spent too much time around Victoria. "I suppose, for just a few minutes." Emma's excitement was infectious. She chattered constantly as Victoria showed her around the office, pointing out landmarks through the telescope, explaining what various awards on the walls meant. The child absorbed everything with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Daddy used to have an office like this," Emma said suddenly, peering through the telescope at the lights of Brooklyn. Victoria froze. "He did?" Before Mommy got sick. He had a big desk and lots of books, and people came to ask him questions about money." Victoria looked toward Daniel, who had gone very still by the window. "Emma, it's okay, Daddy. Mommy said it's okay to remember the good parts." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Victoria felt like she was standing on the edge of a chasm, looking down into depths she couldn't fathom. "What kind of work did your daddy do?" she asked gently. "He helped people understand when companies were telling the truth about their money. He was really, really smart. But then Mommy got sick, and we had to sell everything to help her feel better. And Daddy had to find a different job so he could take care of me." Victoria's throat tightened. "What happened to your mommy?" Emma's face grew solemn. "She went to heaven, but she said Daddy and I would be okay because we take care of each other. And we do. We're a team." Daniel's voice was rough when he spoke. "That's enough questions for tonight, Em. Ms. Ashworth has work to do." But as they prepared to leave, Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Ms. Victoria, are you lonely in your tower?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you work really late every night, and you don't have any pictures on your desk of people who love you. That seems really sad." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, touched by the child's earnest concern. "Sometimes important work requires sacrifice, sweetheart. But who takes care of you?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine innocence, that Victoria found herself blinking back unexpected tears. I take care of myself." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. Then she wrapped her small arms around Victoria's neck in a fierce hug. "Everyone needs someone to take care of them, even princesses." As Daniel gently extracted his daughter and prepared to leave, Victoria called out, "Daniel, what kind of financial work did you do before?" He paused at the door, Emma's hand in his. For a moment, Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice held notes of pride and pain in equal measure. "Corporate analysis, due diligence for major acquisitions. I specialized in identifying red flags that others missed." Then they were gone, leaving Victoria alone with a revelation that changed everything. The man who cleaned her floors had once done exactly the kind of work she was struggling with. The man who emptied her wastebaskets had specialized in the precise skills she needed most for the Meridian deal. Victoria spent the rest of the night researching. Daniel Carter, MIT PhD in economics, 2015. Previously senior analyst at Whitmore & Associates, one of the most prestigious financial consulting firms on the East Coast. His last published analysis had been cited in the Harvard Business Review. And then, 3 years ago, nothing. As if Daniel Carter, the financial analyst, had simply vanished, replaced by Daniel Carter, the janitor. The next evening, Victoria didn't even pretend to be surprised when she heard the elevator. She was waiting in the hallway when Daniel emerged with his cart. "I looked you up," she said without preamble. Daniel's face went carefully neutral. "Did you?" "MIT, Harvard Business Review, Whitmore & Associates. You were one of the most respected analysts in the industry." "That was a long time ago." 3 years isn't that long." Daniel continued preparing his cart with methodical precision. "Long enough for a lot of things to change." Victoria stepped closer. "Daniel, I need help. This Meridian acquisition. There are things about their financials that don't add up, and I can't put my finger on what's wrong. I've got a team of Harvard MBAs who can't see what I'm seeing, and the board is pressuring me to close by the end of the week." Daniel's hand stilled on the cleaning supplies. "I'm sure your team is more than qualified, but you were better. The analysis on the Henley Morrison deal, the one that saved Whitmore's clients $2.3 billion, that was yours." Now he looked at her directly, and Victoria saw something flicker in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of being truly seen for the first time in 3 years. "How do you know that wasn't collaborative work?" "Because I know genius when I see it, and because I recognize the methodology. It's the same pattern I'm trying to apply to Meridian, but I'm missing something crucial." Daniel was quiet for so long that Victoria wondered if he would simply walk away. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What specifically isn't adding up?" Despite herself, Victoria felt a surge of hope. "Their subsidiary earnings. The regional breakdowns don't match the consolidated reports, and their overseas operations show profit margins that seem impossible given market conditions." Daniel's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Which subsidiaries?" "Primarily the Southeast Asian operations. Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos. They're reporting 300% profit growth year over year in markets that have been contracting." Something crossed Daniel's face, recognition, and something that might have been fear. "Ms. Ashworth, maybe you should trust your instincts and walk away from this deal." "Walk away?" "This is the most important acquisition in our company's history. My grandfather built this company. My father expanded it globally. And this deal will what? Make you worthy of their legacy?" Victoria stepped back as if slapped. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry. That was out of line." Daniel's voice was gentle again, but his eyes held a knowledge that unsettled her. "I just mean, sometimes the most important thing you can do is know when not to do something. You're talking in riddles. I'm talking about survival." The word hung between them like a warning. Victoria felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Daniel, do you know something about Meridian Corporation that I don't?" Again, that careful pause. "I know that some deals that look too good to be true usually are." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you." Frustration boiled over. "Why? Why can't you just tell me what you know? If you have information that could help me make the right decision, because some information comes with a price that's too high to pay." Victoria stared at him, seeing layers of meaning in his words that she couldn't quite decipher. "What aren't you telling me?" Daniel began pushing his cart toward the elevator. "Good night, Ms. Ashworth. I hope you make the right choice." But as the elevator doors began to close, Victoria called out, "Where's Emma tonight?" The doors stopped. Daniel's face appeared in the gap, and for the first time she saw cracks in his careful composure. "She's safe. That's all that matters." Safe from what? The doors closed without an answer. Victoria spent the next 2 days unable to concentrate on anything except the mystery of Daniel Carter. She found herself working late hoping he would appear, but the night cleaning crew that came was different. Older men who worked efficiently and silently without engaging in conversation. On Wednesday night, her patience ran out. She went to building security. "I need to speak with Daniel Carter. He's part of the night cleaning crew." The security guard, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, looked puzzled. "Daniel Carter? He called in sick the last 2 nights. Said he had a family emergency. Do you have a contact number for him?" "Ma'am, I can't give out employee information. This is important. I need to speak with him about a work matter." Rodriguez hesitated, then seemed to remember who was asking. "I suppose he did give us an alternate contact. Emergency situations only. It's not his home number, though. Some kind of legal office." Victoria's blood went cold. Legal office? Henderson, Martinez and Associates. Said if anything happened, and we couldn't reach him, to call them. Strange setup for a janitor, if you ask me. Victoria thanked Rodriguez and immediately went back to her office to research the law firm. Henderson, Martinez and Associates specialized in witness protection and whistleblower advocacy. The pieces were starting to come together, painting a picture that terrified her. Thursday night brought answers she wasn't prepared for. Victoria was reviewing the Meridian contract one final time when Jennifer's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Ashworth, there's a Daniel Carter here to see you. He says it's urgent." "Send him in immediately." Daniel entered her office looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, clutching his hand with visible anxiety, was Emma. The little girl's usual bright demeanor was subdued, and she stayed pressed close to her father's side. "Daniel, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you." "We've been somewhere safe." His voice was tight with strain. "But Emma insisted on coming. She said you needed to know the truth." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay?" Emma nodded, but her eyes were wide with a fear that was heartbreaking in someone so young. "Ms. Victoria, I need to tell you about the bad man." "What bad man?" Emma looked up at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly despite his obvious reluctance. "The man on TV, the one who hurt people and lied about money. Daddy says you might give him more money, and that would be very bad." Victoria's hands began to tremble. "Emma, what man on TV?" Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard Blackstone, CEO of Meridian Corporation." Victoria sank into her chair. "What does Emma know about Richard Blackstone?" "More than any child should ever have to know." Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Can I show you something?" The child pulled a drawing from her backpack. Not the cheerful crayon artwork Victoria had seen before, but something darker. Pencil sketches of figures, remarkably detailed for a 6-year-old. A man in a suit, standing over smaller figures. Buildings with smoke coming from them. People lying down with X's over their eyes. "Emma drew these after she had nightmares," Daniel explained. "She's been having them for 3 years." Victoria studied the drawings with growing horror. This is about Meridian Corporation?" "About what Meridian Corporation has done. What Richard Blackstone has done." Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "He's not just a liar about money, Ms. Victoria. He hurt people. He made them go away forever." Victoria looked between Daniel and Emma, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "Emma, how do you know about Richard Blackstone?" The 6-year-old's face crumpled, and she buried her face against Daniel's leg. Daniel's arms came around her protectively, and when he spoke, his voice carried 3 years of pain. "Because Richard Blackstone is Emma's biological father." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. Emma's fear, Daniel's evasiveness, the legal contact, the nightmares, the detailed knowledge of corporate crime. He abandoned her, Daniel continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. When Emma was diagnosed with mild autism at age 3, Blackstone decided she was damaged goods. He cut off all support, denied paternity, and disappeared from her life. My wife Sarah was Emma's pediatrician. We were trying to help Emma with her developmental needs when Blackstone made it clear he wanted nothing to do with an imperfect child. Victoria felt sick. So you adopted her? We were in the process when Sarah got her diagnosis, stage 4 ovarian cancer. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. The stress of fighting Blackstone legally, combined with her illness. Sarah died 8 months later, but she made me promise to protect Emma, to keep her safe from him. Emma lifted her tear-stained face. Daddy keeps his promises, even when it's really, really hard. But why didn't you tell me this before? Daniel's laugh was bitter. Tell you what, that the man you're about to make a $10 billion deal with is a monster who abandons disabled children? That he's also the same man who's been systematically covering up industrial accidents that have killed dozens of workers? That your acquisition target is built on a foundation of blood and lies? You have proof of this? I have everything. Financial records, internal communications, witness statements. I spent 2 years gathering evidence before Sarah died, and I've spent the 3 years since making sure it's bulletproof. Victoria stared at him. You're planning to expose him? I was planning to expose him. But then Emma started having the nightmares again. She recognized him from news coverage about your merger. She's been terrified that if he gets more powerful, he'll come back for her. Come back for her? Why would he? Emma's small voice interrupted. Because I remember things. Daniel's face went white. Emma, we don't need to. Yes, we do, Daddy. Ms. Victoria needs to know so she can protect other people like you and Mommy tried to protect me. Emma looked directly at Victoria, with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. I have a really good memory, better than most people. I remember things from when I was very little, and I remember him talking on the phone about the factory accident. I remember him saying it was good that the workers died, because dead people can't tell secrets about the bad chemicals. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of Victoria's heartbeat in her ears. Emma, Victoria whispered. You're saying you witnessed Richard Blackstone talking about covering up industrial deaths? Emma nodded solemnly. 12 people. He said 12 people couldn't tell anyone about the poison anymore. Daniel pulled Emma closer. She's been carrying this for 3 years. My wife made recordings of Emma's statements before she died, worked with child psychologists to document everything properly. It's all legally admissible. But you haven't gone to authorities because the moment I do, Emma becomes the primary witness in a murder case against one of the most powerful men in America. She becomes a target. Daniel's voice was fierce with protective desperation. I won't put her through that unless I have no other choice. Victoria stood up, pacing to the window. The Manhattan skyline looked different now, less like a constellation of possibilities, more like a web of corruption and secrets. The merger, she said slowly. You're afraid that if Meridian gets bigger, gets more resources through my company, Blackstone becomes untouchable, and Emma becomes a loose end he can't afford to leave tied. Victoria turned back to face them. Emma had climbed into Daniel's lap and was drawing again. Not the dark sketches from before, but a picture of 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. That's us, Emma said, holding up the drawing. You and Daddy and me. We're a team now, right? Teams protect each other. Looking at this little girl, brilliant, brave, carrying secrets that could topple empires, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. The merger, the board's expectations, even her family legacy seemed suddenly small compared to the trust in Emma's eyes. "Yes," Victoria said firmly. "We're a team." But even as she said it, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved up to 6 a.m. tomorrow. They want final merger decision first thing. Also, someone from Meridian Corp called asking about your relationship with building maintenance staff. Thought you should know. Jay." Victoria's blood turned to ice. She showed the message to Daniel, whose face went gray. "They know," he whispered. Emma looked between the two adults, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Are we in trouble?" Victoria knelt down and took Emma's small hands in hers. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow morning, I have to make a very important decision, and that decision is going to affect whether you and your daddy stay safe." "What kind of decision?" Victoria looked into Emma's trusting eyes and made a choice that would change all of their lives. The kind that makes us more than just a team. The kind that makes us a family. The boardroom at Ashworth Industries had never felt more like a battlefield. At 6 a.m. sharp, Victoria faced 12 of the most powerful business leaders in New York, their faces arranged around the mahogany conference table like a tribunal of judgment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was waking up to what might be the most important day in the company's 90-year history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice steady despite the sleepless night behind her. "I'm recommending we terminate the Meridian Corporation acquisition, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles Ashworth, Victoria's father and chairman of the board, leaned forward with the controlled fury she remembered from childhood. "Victoria, this merger represents 18 months of work and will establish us as the dominant force in our sector. On what grounds are you suggesting we abandon it?" "On the grounds that Meridian Corporation is built on a foundation of fraud and murder." The word murder fell into the boardroom like a grenade. Board members exchanged glances that ranged from shocked to skeptical to openly hostile. Margaret Sinclair, the lead independent director, spoke first. "Victoria, these are extremely serious allegations. What evidence do you have to support such claims?" Victoria had anticipated this question. She'd spent the entire night with Daniel and Emma, going through every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that Sarah Carter had meticulously compiled before her death. The weight of it all, the corporate fraud, the environmental cover-ups, the industrial accidents that were actually calculated murders, had left her feeling physically sick. "I have financial records showing systematic falsification of safety reports, internal communications discussing the deliberate concealment of environmental violations, and witness testimony regarding the deaths of 12 factory workers in Myanmar." "Witness testimony from whom?" her father demanded. Victoria hesitated. This was the moment that would either save Emma or destroy her. From someone who was present when Richard Blackstone discussed the cover-up. And this mysterious witness is? A 6-year-old girl named Emma Carter. The boardroom erupted. Voices overlapped in disbelief, anger, and dismissal. Victoria heard phrases like career suicide and complete breakdown, and remove her from leadership. Charles Ashworth's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Victoria, are you seriously suggesting we abandon a $10 billion acquisition based on the testimony of a child? I'm suggesting we abandon it because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Margaret Sinclair's voice was icy. "Victoria, we have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders. We cannot make decisions based on emotional appeals from what? From the victims of corporate murder?" The room fell silent again. Victoria could see in their faces the exact moment they stopped seeing her as their CEO and started seeing her as a problem to be managed. Her father's voice, when it came, carried the weight of 3 generations of disappointed expectations. "Victoria, I think you need to take some time off. Perhaps seek professional help. This level of paranoia and emotional instability. I'm not unstable. I'm finally seeing clearly." "Then explain to me how you came by this evidence. How did you even learn about these alleged crimes?" Victoria took a deep breath. "From Daniel Carter. He's a former financial analyst who worked for Meridian Corporation 5 years ago. He discovered the fraud and tried to expose it. The company destroyed his career, and the stress of the legal battle contributed to his wife's death from cancer. And where is this Daniel Carter now? He works here, in building maintenance." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. This wasn't shock or anger. This was the moment her colleagues decided she had completely lost her mind. Board member Thomas Whitfield spoke with the careful tone usually reserved for mental patients. "Victoria, you're telling us that you're willing to destroy the company based on information from a janitor?" "I'm telling you that I'm willing to save the company based on information from a man who sacrificed everything to protect innocent people." "Where is this man now?" her father asked. "Somewhere safe, with his daughter." "The 6-year-old witness?" "Yes." Charles Ashworth stood up, his face carved from stone. "Victoria, I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove you as CEO pending psychological evaluation." "You can't do that." "I can, and I will. All in favor of—" The boardroom doors burst open. Daniel Carter walked in, carrying Emma in his arms. The little girl's face was pale, but determined, and she clutched a small backpack against her chest. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Daniel said, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what he was doing. "But Emma has something she needs to say." Security guards appeared in the doorway behind them, but Victoria held up a hand. "Let them stay!" Charles Ashworth's voice was thunderous. "Victoria, this is completely inappropriate. Remove these people immediately." But Emma had already slipped from Daniel's arms and walked to the head of the conference table. At 6 years old, she barely came up to the table's edge, but something in her posture commanded attention. "My name is Emma Carter," she said, in her clear, sweet voice. "And I need to tell you about the bad man who hurt my daddy and killed 12 people." The room was utterly silent now. Even the most hardened board members couldn't bring themselves to interrupt a child. Emma opened her backpack and pulled out her drawings. Not the cheerful crayon pictures Victoria had first seen, but the darker sketches she'd shown the night before. She spread them across the conference table with the methodical precision of someone much older. "This is Richard Blackstone," she said, pointing to one drawing. "He's my biological father, but he's not my daddy. Daddy is the one who takes care of me and loves me even when I'm different." She pointed to another drawing. "These are the workers who died in the factory. Mr. Blackstone made the ceiling fall down on purpose because they knew about the poison chemicals. I heard him talking about it on the phone." Margaret Sinclair leaned forward despite herself. "Sweetheart, how could you have heard him talking about it?" Emma's eyes, so like Daniel's, were grave with knowledge no child should possess. "Because I was there. Before Mommy got sick. Before Daddy lost his job. I lived with Mr. Blackstone sometimes. I was very little, but I remember everything. People with autism often have very good memories." She pulled out a small recording device that looked like a toy. "Mommy was a doctor. She knew that grown-ups might not believe me, so she helped me record everything I remembered. She made sure it was done properly, so it would help the police someday." Thomas Whitfield cleared his throat. "Child, even if what you're saying is true, why should we—" "Because he's going to do it again." Emma's voice was steady but urgent. "If you give him more money, he'll hurt more people, and he might try to hurt me because I know his secrets." Daniel stepped forward. "Yesterday, Meridian Corporation made inquiries about Emma and me. They know we're here. Richard Blackstone is already planning his next move. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and felt her blood freeze. A text from an unknown number. "Beautiful daughter you have there, Carter. Would be a shame if something happened to her. Cancel the merger and she stays safe. Proceed with it and I get custody of my biological child. Your choice." Victoria showed the message to Daniel, who went white. Emma, however, seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. "He sent a message, didn't he?" she asked quietly. "He does that. He tries to scare people into being quiet." She climbed onto a chair so she could see all the board members clearly. But here's the thing about bad people. They only win if good people don't help each other. Ms. Victoria is good people. Daddy is good people. And I think you're all good people too, even if you're scared. Emma looked directly at Charles Ashworth. "Are you Ms. Victoria's daddy?" Charles's stern expression softened slightly. "I am." "Then you know she's really smart and brave. She works so hard to help people. Don't you want her to be proud of the choices she makes?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria watched her father's face, seeing the internal struggle between business pragmatism and parental love. Margaret Sinclair spoke first. "Even if we accept everything you're saying as true, what exactly are you proposing we do? We've invested enormous resources in this acquisition." Daniel stepped forward. "I have a different proposal." All eyes turned to him. Despite his janitor's uniform, despite the desperate circumstances, Daniel Carter commanded the room with an authority that reminded Victoria why he'd once been one of the most respected analysts on Wall Street. "Meridian Corporation is about to collapse under the weight of its own corruption," Daniel said. "Within 6 months, maybe less, the truth about their operations will come out. The environmental lawsuits alone will bankrupt them. But their legitimate subsidiaries, the ones not involved in the fraud, are genuinely valuable." He walked to the whiteboard and began drawing a corporate structure diagram with the fluency of someone who'd done this countless times before. Instead of acquiring Meridian as a whole, Ashworth Industries could position itself to acquire their clean assets during the bankruptcy proceedings. You'd get the valuable parts of the company for a fraction of the current asking price, without inheriting their legal liabilities. Thomas Whitfield leaned forward with genuine interest. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "If the evidence I've compiled is presented to the proper authorities, Meridian will be under federal investigation within a week. Their stock price will collapse, their credit lines will be frozen, and their bankruptcy filing will follow shortly after." Victoria watched the faces around the table. She could see the shift, from skepticism to calculation, from dismissal to serious consideration. "What about the little girl?" Margaret asked. "If we proceed with exposing Meridian, won't she be in danger?" Emma answered for herself. "I'll be in more danger if we don't stop him. Bad people get worse when they get more power." Charles Ashworth had been silent for several minutes, studying Daniel's diagram. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured but serious. "Mr. Carter, your analysis assumes that Richard Blackstone will be prosecuted and convicted. What if he uses his resources to fight the charges? What if he wins?" Daniel's expression grew grim. "Then Emma and I will have to disappear, permanently. And Richard Blackstone will continue killing people for profit." The room fell quiet, except for the sound of Emma's crayons. She was drawing again, a picture of stick figures holding hands in front of a building with Ashworth written above it. "I don't want to disappear," Emma said, without looking up from her drawing. "I like it here. I like Ms. Victoria, and I like that Daddy smiles again. I want us to be a real family." Victoria felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. She looked around the table at these powerful, wealthy, influential people. And then at this little girl, who had more courage in her small body than most adults would ever possess. "I'm calling for a vote," Victoria announced. "All in favor of terminating the Meridian acquisition and instead pursuing Daniel's alternative strategy." Margaret Sinclair raised her hand first, surprising everyone. "I have grandchildren Emma's age. I vote yes." Thomas Whitfield was next. "The financial strategy is sound. Yes." One by one, hands rose around the table. Victoria watched her father, waiting for his decision. Charles Ashworth stared at Emma's drawing for a long moment before slowly raising his hand. "Unanimous," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "The motion passes." Emma looked up from her drawing, beaming. "Does that mean we won?" "It means we're going to fight," Victoria said. "And sometimes, fighting is the same thing as winning." But the celebration was short-lived. Victoria's phone rang. FBI agent Sarah Martinez from the White Collar Crime Division. "Ms. Ashworth, we've been monitoring communications related to the Meridian investigation. Richard Blackstone has filed for emergency custody of Emma Carter. The hearing is this afternoon at 2 p.m. He's claiming that Daniel Carter kidnapped his daughter and is using her in an extortion scheme against Meridian Corporation." Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. Can he do that? He's Emma's biological father, and he has significant legal resources. Unless we can prove he's unfit, we can prove he's a murderer. Child testimony is complicated, especially in cases involving autism spectrum disorders. Defense lawyers can argue that Emma's condition makes her testimony unreliable. We need more than her witness statement. Victoria looked at Daniel, whose face had gone ashen. Emma had stopped drawing and was listening with the intense focus she brought to everything. "What do we need to do?" Victoria asked. "We need Richard Blackstone to incriminate himself, on record, in a way that can't be dismissed or explained away." Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "I have an idea." Everyone turned to look at the 6-year-old, who had climbed down from her chair and was standing with the composed confidence of someone much older. "He'll want to see me," Emma said. "He'll want to prove that I'm lying or that I don't remember things correctly. If someone could record him talking to me—" "Absolutely not," Daniel said immediately. "I won't put you in the same room with him." "Daddy, he's going to get me anyway if we don't stop him. At least this way, we can make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level. "Sweetheart, that's very brave, but your daddy is right. It's too dangerous." Emma's eyes, so wise for her age, met Victoria's steadily. "Ms. Victoria, remember what you said about teams? Teams protect each other. This is how I protect you and Daddy." Agent Martinez's voice came through the phone. "If we could get a controlled meeting with proper surveillance and protection—" "No," Daniel said firmly. "I won't use my daughter as bait." Emma walked over to Daniel and took his hands in her small ones. "Daddy, do you remember what you told me about being brave? You said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are scared." Daniel's face crumpled. "Emma, baby, I can't lose you too. You won't lose me. We're a team, remember? All 3 of us." She looked between Daniel and Victoria with the absolute trust that only a child can possess. "Besides, I have the best daddy in the world and the smartest, bravest princess in the tower. Bad people can't win against that." 3 hours later, Victoria found herself in a conference room at FBI headquarters, watching Emma through a one-way mirror. The little girl sat at a small table, crayons and paper spread before her, looking for all the world like any normal child at play. Richard Blackstone entered the room with his team of lawyers, and Victoria felt her skin crawl. He was exactly what she'd expected. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed, with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Everything about him radiated power and entitlement. "Hello, Emma," he said, sitting across from her at the small table. "Do you remember me?" Emma looked up from her drawing, a picture of a house with stick figures in the windows. "You're the man who said I was broken." Blackstone's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I never said you were broken, sweetheart. I said you needed special help that I couldn't provide. You said defective children weren't worth the investment." Through the recording equipment, Victoria could hear one of Blackstone's lawyers shifting uncomfortably. That phrase, defective children, was exactly the kind of language that would destroy him in family court. "Emma, you were very young. Sometimes children remember things differently than they actually happened." Emma continued coloring, her voice matter-of-fact. "I remember things exactly. That's how my brain works. I remember you talking about the 12 people who died in the factory. I don't know what you think you heard. I heard you say it was good that they died because dead people can't tell secrets about the poison." Emma looked up at him with those grave, knowing eyes. "You said problem solved when your assistant told you they were all dead." Blackstone's composure cracked slightly. "Emma, you're a confused little girl who's been coached by adults with an agenda." "What agenda?" "To hurt me. To take money from my company." Emma tilted her head with the curious expression she got when adults said things that didn't make sense. Why would anyone want to take money for people being dead? Money doesn't bring people back. Sometimes adults lie about these things to get rich. Like you lied about the safety inspections? Blackstone went very still. "What do you know about safety inspections? I know you told the inspectors that the ceiling was safe when you knew it wasn't. I know you wanted it to fall down." "That's impossible. You were 3 years old. I was 4. And I drew pictures afterward because the dreams were scary. Do you want to see?" Emma pulled out her sketchbook and showed him the detailed drawings of the factory collapse. Blackstone stared at them, his face pale. "How did you? These details. I remember everything," Emma said simply. "That's my superpower. Daddy says everyone has superpowers, and remembering is mine." Victoria watched Blackstone's face cycle through emotions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally, cold rage. "Well," he said, his voice different now, harder. "I suppose we'll have to do something about your superpower, won't we?" Emma's crayons stopped moving. "What do you mean?" Blackstone leaned forward, and his true nature finally showed through the civilized facade. "I mean, Emma, that little girls who tell lies about their fathers sometimes have accidents. Sometimes they get sick. Sometimes they disappear." The room went dead silent, except for the sound of recording equipment capturing every word. Emma, incredibly, didn't seem frightened. Instead, she looked at Blackstone with something that might have been pity. "You're still the same person who threw me away," she said quietly. "But I'm not the same scared little girl anymore. I have a real daddy now, and a princess who protects people, and agents who catch bad guys." She looked directly at the one-way mirror and smiled. "And I have really good friends watching me right now." Blackstone spun around, finally realizing he'd been played. His face contorted with fury as FBI agents burst through the door. "Richard Blackstone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate fraud, and threatening a federal witness." As they led him away in handcuffs, Blackstone locked eyes with Victoria through the mirror. The hatred and promise of revenge in that gaze made her blood run cold. But Emma's small hand slipping into hers brought her back to what mattered. "We did it," Emma whispered. "We protected each other." The custody hearing 3 days later lasted exactly 4 minutes. Judge Patricia Chen took one look at the FBI recording, the evidence of corporate murder, and Richard Blackstone's threats against a child, and awarded full custody to Daniel Carter with a restraining order that would keep Blackstone away from Emma for life. The Meridian Corporation collapsed within 2 weeks, exactly as Daniel had predicted. Ashworth Industries acquired their clean assets for $2.8 billion, less than a third of what the original merger would have cost, and emerged as the dominant player in their industry. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same conference room where Emma had faced down one of the most powerful men in America. But today was different. Today was Daniel's first board meeting as Chief Financial Officer of Ashworth Industries. Emma sat in a corner of the room with her coloring books, officially designated as Special Consultant for Remembering Important Things, a position Victoria had created specifically for her, complete with a tiny business card that made Emma giggle with delight. The integration of Meridian's clean assets is ahead of schedule, Daniel reported to the board. We're projecting a 40% increase in revenue by year-end, with none of the legal liabilities we would have inherited from the original merger. Charles Ashworth nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Daniel. Your analysis saved this company. Actually, Daniel said, glancing at Victoria with the smile that still made her heart skip, I think we saved each other. After the meeting, Victoria found Emma on the executive floor's balcony, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through the telescope Victoria had shown her that first night. What do you see out there, sweetheart? Emma looked up, her face bright with wonder. I see all the people we're going to help. All the families like ours who need someone to protect them. Victoria knelt down beside her. Families like ours? You know, people who choose to love each other even when they're different. People who keep each other safe. Daniel joined them on the balcony, wrapping his arms around both of them. Emma immediately snuggled between them, with the contentment of a child who had finally found where she belonged. Daddy, Ms. Victoria, I have something important to tell you. They looked down at her expectantly. Emma's face was serious as she made her announcement. I think our family needs to get bigger. Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances over her head. They'd been talking about marriage for months, but had been waiting for the right moment to discuss it with Emma. What do you mean, bigger? Victoria asked carefully. Emma pulled out a fresh drawing, this one showing stick figures in wedding clothes, with a small figure in a bridesmaid dress. I mean, you should get married, and make it official. And maybe someday I could have a little brother or sister to protect. She looked between them with that matter-of-fact expression that always preceded her most profound observations. Besides, every princess needs a real family, not just a castle. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. Emma Carter, how did you get so wise? I learned from the best daddy and the best princess in the whole world. As Daniel pulled them both closer, Victoria realized that Emma was right. The castle, the company, the wealth, the power, none of it meant anything without the people who made it home. 1 year later, Emma Carter Ashworth walked down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral in a purple dress that sparkled with every step, carrying a bouquet of white roses and beaming like the sun itself. Behind her, Victoria Ashworth walked toward Daniel Carter in a simple but elegant gown, her face radiant with the kind of happiness that comes from finally understanding what truly matters. The ceremony was attended by FBI agents and board members, former colleagues and new friends, but the only opinion that mattered to Victoria was Emma's. When the priest asked if anyone had objections to the union, Emma's clear voice rang out, I object! The entire cathedral held its breath until she continued, I object to waiting any longer for them to kiss and make it official. The laughter that filled the ancient space was joyous and pure, the sound of a family that had fought for each other and won. As Daniel kissed his bride, and Emma cheered from her position as maid of honor, Victoria realized that the little girl had been right about everything. Love did conquer all obstacles, not by avoiding them, but by facing them together. The Ashworth Industries that emerged from the Meridian scandal was stronger, more ethical, and more profitable than ever before. Under Daniel's financial guidance and Victoria's leadership, they pioneered corporate responsibility initiatives that became industry standards. But their greatest achievement wasn't measured in stock prices or profit margins. It was measured in the laughter of a little girl who had found her forever family, in the love of two people who had discovered that real strength comes from protecting what matters most, and in the knowledge that sometimes the most important victories are won, not in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when chosen family decides to hold on to each other no matter what. Emma Carter Ashworth, now 7 years old and officially the happiest flower girl in New York City, put it best in her wedding speech. Some people think families have to match, but the best families are the ones where different people choose to love each other exactly as they are. As Victoria and Daniel danced their first dance as husband and wife, with Emma twirling between them in her sparkling dress, the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows like a promise of all the tomorrows they would face together. They had started as strangers, a lonely CEO, a broken man, and a little girl carrying secrets too big for her small shoulders. But they had become something infinitely more precious. A family built not on blood or circumstance, but on choice, courage, and an unshakable belief that love really could conquer all. The janitor who stopped a $10 billion merger with one sentence had given Victoria something worth infinitely more than any business deal. He had given her a home. And Emma, the little girl with the superpower of remembering everything, would never forget the day her family chose each other and decided to be brave together.